The views expressed by the speakers of CamaPlan podcasts are those of the speakers only and may not reflect those of Cama, its members, or employees. Cama does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by these speakers. Professional advisors should be consulted before implementing any options presented. Cama absolutely does not endorse or recommend any individual or organization, including the speakers. Cama, its members, and employees do not accept liability for losses and or damages arising from errors or omissions within, reliance upon, or any use of the information provided by the speakers. Individuals are strongly encouraged by Cama to conduct their own due diligence before making any investment choices. Cama does not act as, nor offer the services of, an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. If tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows our experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, Pennsylvania, that is focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And of course, we are continuing to record our podcast remotely. I'm Jess Jones, CamaPlan team member and your podcast host. Our guest this week is the co-founder of Bardown Investments, LLC, and How's It Look, LLC, a best-selling author of The Only Woman in the Room, Knowledge and Inspiration from 20 Women Real Estate Investors, and an active member of the Real Estate Invest Her community. She has over 10 years of real estate experience and has been involved in over $60 million in transactions within both single and multifamily real estate. She co-founded Bardown Investments, LLC with her husband, Kyle. Not only does she lead asset and construction management on her multifamily investments, but she also has provided operational consulting for several other large multifamily owners throughout the country. Additionally, she and her father, Tom, have a very successful high-end flipping business in Pennsylvania, How's It Look, LLC, which handles several million in transactions annually. And when she's not working on all these businesses, she enjoys spending time with her family, including her husband and their 2 daughters, as well as competing with her horse, Wow. And wow, indeed. So please welcome Ashley Wilson to our podcast. Ashley, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've gotten to have a couple of conversations before this, but you and I haven't actually gotten to sit down and dig deeper into, your early life and some of your early stories and what's led you to become who you are today. So I'm excited to get to dive in and get to talk about that with you. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me some more about your background, where you were born and grew up, and what you studied in school, and some things that just made who you are today.
Wow, starting from the beginning. Okay, so I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in a small town called Lynnfield, Pennsylvania, which is near Royersford. Anyone who's local to the area, it's near Royersford, Pennsylvania. And I grew up in a working class family. My dad is a general contractor, and he's had his own business for over 40 years. And my mom at the time worked for an auto body repair shop that was a small business, about 30 employees. So I had strong influences from the start of 2 working parents. And one thing that was really inspirational to me was seeing both of my parents be able to work at their jobs, but still support my brother and myself throughout our entire childhood. Whatever endeavors we decided to pick up, they were always there and supporting us. So that meant a great deal to me and had a huge impact. And it made me want to pursue a career that allowed me that freedom to be there for my family. That was the most important thing to me. Mm-hmm. So I went to small schools all growing up. I went to Montgomery School in Chester Springs, and then I went to the Hill School in Pottstown. The Hill School was all boys, and then went co-ed my first year there, which was my sophomore year. And then from there, I went to Colgate. And after Colgate, I wanted to take a year off because I wanted to be a neuropsychologist. I wanted to study concussion syndrome in professional athletes. While taking that year off, I worked for Santa Fe Aventis and their neuropsychology department. And the director convinced me to take a different career path and convinced me to stay within pharmaceuticals and clinical research and development. So I took that career path while pursuing a master's from Penn State in leadership development, which is part of their business program. And from there, I continued on in the pharma world for quite a significant period of time. I worked at Wyeth and then eventually landing at GlaxoSmithKline in their vaccine development department. And ultimately, I was doing very, very well. I was fast-tracked within my profession. I loved what I was doing, but I was always working more and more hours to get ahead. And I was working harder and harder and harder to get ahead. And my ultimate goal was to be the head of a pharmaceutical company because I thought that would allow me the ultimate freedom to be there for my family. That would allow me to control my time, my schedule. And what I quickly realized was that the opposite was actually happening. I was going down a path that really handcuffed me to my job. And those handcuffs tightened the more I worked. And they tightened around my wrists because it was a very lucrative career to pursue. So it was very hard to replace that income and to exit out of it. So my transition ultimately came because my husband, he was a professional athlete, and he was looking for ways in which we could diversify our retirement strategy. And he's not a huge believer and convinced me as well about the stock market. So we were pursuing other investment avenues and we landed on real estate. So ultimately we invested on the side and it quickly snowballed into me leaving pharma and pursuing real estate full time.
That's really interesting. I find it so interesting also, Ashley, you've obviously had a different path in terms of, you went into pharma, but I find it interesting that so many of our guests have actually had these backgrounds in, I know, Liz Faircloth, so many people have had these backgrounds in psychology and wanted to study the mind before they got involved in alternative investments. I don't know if there's a major connection there, but I think it's really interesting that some people who are fascinated by how the mind works have found themselves thinking of alternative investments. So I just think that that's really cool that that's, what you started getting involved in. But I also think that you raise a really excellent point of the idea of time freedom just as much as financial freedom, and being handcuffed to your job and working those extra hours and things like that can really take time away from the things that you're really trying to focus on when you're financially free. So I think you raise a lot of really interesting points that obviously I think came up later on in your investment career. So I think it's cool that that's how you got involved in real estate investing. And how did house flipping come into it? I know that came into things a little bit later, but how did you come upon house flipping within the real estate investing world?
House flipping actually came quite naturally for me because I saw my father, as I mentioned, he was a general contractor. He still is a general contractor. But I saw my father partnering with other investors. And I thought, actually my husband and I both thought it would be more advantageous if my father and I partnered together, because my father and I, we trust each other. We have a lot of inherent characteristics that make up a good partnership. Mm-hmm. Thus, it was just a very easy transition for us to want to get into flipping. So ultimately what happened was my husband's career took us overseas, and simultaneously I resigned from working in pharma, and I was stir crazy. I just needed something to do. Right. Yeah. So, and I think that's a similarity of someone who investigates the mind. Is someone who investigates the mind is normally on knowledge quests all the time. They're always wanting to pursue education and have their mind intellectually stimulated. And I found that through partnering with my father on flipping. So while we were living overseas, I said to my husband, we always knew we wanted to get into real estate investing full time after his career. But what I proposed to my husband was, why don't we get into full-time investing while you're still playing? So when you are ready to retire, we have no gap in our income. And he thought that was pretty smart way to think about that. So what we did is he continued to pursue hockey while I partnered with my father and we started a flipping business. As I grew up in the area, it was very easy for me to live in Europe and understand the market, select houses. We leveraged technology to be able to walk through the houses together, design. It's amazing how much you can do from afar with flipping. You don't really think you can do it, but my dad served as the boots on the ground and I literally did soup to nuts, anything that could make his life easier while he was working. That's when, as far as scheduling contractors, ordering materials, doing the design, finding the houses, doing the analysis, running accounting. I mean, literally anything that you can possibly think of is capable from afar. So it really helped my dad to be able to execute. And it kept me, busy as well. Yeah. It was just a perfect fit. And it still is a perfect fit. We still have the business today.
That's awesome. So I think it's interesting that, partnership is something that's also come up a lot this year as we've talked to a number of our guests, and you have some really interesting partnerships. My dad's also a general contractor, but I don't think he and I have enough. We have too much in common, and none of them are like the good traits to, I think, successfully run a business together. So I think that that's really interesting. So one thing that I do ask a lot of our guests, and I'm interested to hear your responses, is, you work with family, but also how do you find those inherent traits that are, or what do you think are the inherent traits that you think make up a good and productive partnership? Whether it's, in your work that you do in Bardown Investments with your husband, or how's it look with your dad? Like how do those traits complement each other, or what do you look for in terms of, strengths and weaknesses and complementing it that way? So I'm curious about your process and how it's helped you determine who you work with, even outside of that family unit as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the word complement. I think most people want to overlap. They want to partner with their best friend because they get along well. But really, the make or break is whether your skill sets complement or overlap. If they complement, then you can continue going down the path. If they overlap, sometimes you might have a few things that overlap, but if they completely overlap, that's not a good partnership. So what you're looking for first is complementary skills as a starting point, because when you operate a business, there are multiple facets to that business, and by partnering, you increase the bandwidth to execute on those facets. If you have a complementary partner that can tackle part of the tasks and you tackle the other, it makes for a greater outreach as to being able to accomplish and move faster further. If you then have complementary skills, what you're really looking for are, what I look for, the next three things I look for are the 3 C's. So character, competency, and commitment. If you have those 3 things in common, then you can continue going down the path to see how you work together and interact together. So it's not a simple process. And I think that's why a lot of partnerships fail. They think to themselves, people think to themselves, well, I get along really well with this person. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a good person to do business with. Just like when you have friends that are great friends, but you don't want to be roommates with them, it's the same principle.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I would just say that you have to be thorough about who you're partnering with. I think more people spend time on thinking through the business as opposed to the partnership, when really the partnership is whether or not the business is going to be a success or not.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. And does that carry over into any partnerships, or, I know you do a ton of work with consulting and with, managing your assets and things like that. Does it also carry over into everybody else that you work with? You look for those 3 C's in other people, or is it a little bit different the less closely you work with folks?
No, that is exactly what I look for. That's literally my process. So anytime I'm going into business with anyone, I'm looking at that path. I start with, do we have complementary or overlapping skills? Do I believe they have the 3 C's? Do they believe I have the 3 C's? And how do we work together? What are our mindsets? If we are both people who like to take charge and we feel we should be taking charge of each other's tasks, that's not going to work.
Exactly.
But if we feel that we can operate in an autonomous way on our own sets of tasks and give someone the respect and the freedom they need to execute on their tasks, that's a partnership that is set up for success. The inner workings between partners, I think, is so critical. So it's not just the base level, but it's how people interact. And I guess that goes back to what you were saying with Liz and I both being psychology undergrads. It really comes down to mindset. And I think when you have people who focus so much on mindset, you can take a mediocre idea and execute on it exponentially, and it can be a success just because the team around it builds the momentum. But if you take an idea that's an amazing idea and you have a team that is destined for failure, whether they don't get along or they self-sabotage. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons a team can fail. It really isn't about the product or service that the company is delivering on. It's about the team. I think if there was more focus on the team, all organizations would do better. I saw that within pharma. I think pharma hired, hiring is probably the most underrated process that a company focuses on in large corporations, at least in the 3 that I worked for.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to a lot of excess. It leads to a lot of inefficiencies. And it's something that was very frustrating to me when I worked in pharma to see that. So I ultimately knew that in the back of my mind, this was not a good career path for me, because I'm not someone who likes to be in a situation that bothers me for an extended period of time. I need to move on. I don't like just a lot of things that breed out of that situation. So I think it's really important to focus on the team dynamics and building the proper team. And when you don't have the proper team, you lose. If you're going to lose, you lose fast. You lose quickly. That's something that a very good friend of mine, Daniel Harvey, who's also a local Philadelphian real estate investor, told me. And he said, whenever I lose fast. And I love that principle because it just allows you the ability to move on, not be fearful of losing, as long as you know you are willing to make a change quickly to adapt.
Absolutely. And that sounds like a mindset that you obviously have not developed overnight. This seems like it was kind of born out of a lot of experience that you've had, Ashley. So I'm curious, one thing we ask a lot of folks on the podcast is, can you talk some more about some of the early success stories and some of the early, I hate to say the word failure, but the major obstacles that you might have encountered? Maybe it was early on or even recently, some things that have just taught you, I think, the major life lessons that have formed the way that you look at investing and your investment strategies that you've had to develop, similarly to the, if I'm going to lose, I lose fast. I think that it's a really interesting thing, especially with someone who understands mindset like yourself, to understand, and for our listeners to get a glimpse into, okay, here's someone who's super successful. But, here's how she got through a time that she felt that it was less than successful, what she was dealing with.
I tell this story because to me, it's really about perspective. So I'll start with my success. My success was the first house we ever offered on to flip, we received an accepted offer. We flipped the house. We made about $66,000 in profit. And if you look at the statistics of first-time flippers, I think it's like 95% of first-time flippers fail. And of the 5% remaining, 90% of them make $5,000 or less. So on paper, that's a success. I'll tell you about our first failure. Our first failure is the first house we flipped took us 9.5 months to do the renovation. It took us a year from acquisition to close, so when we first acquired it to when we sold it. And that was a failure. So both of them, both my success and my failure early on, are the same story. They're the same property. It's all on how you look at whether or not it was a success or a failure. If you look at the first part of the story that I mentioned, it's deemed a success because on paper, it's considered a success. It's an easy thing that I can rattle off and people can be in awe on my first flip that we were able to have such a huge profit and do so well, and everyone say, wow, that's incredible. I want to get into flipping. It's a failure because my dad and I split the profits 50-50. We flipped one house that year, and neither one of us can live off of $33,000 a year. So that's why it's a failure. A year to date, we improved that process and we took a comparable house. It was actually larger in scale, similar renovation, and we renovated it in 9.5 weeks. We purchased it in the end of September and we closed on it before the end of the year. So about a little over 3 months, and we made almost $100,000. That's a success. So it really kind of depends on the situation, how people define success and failures. And I would just guide everyone when you're listening to podcasts and you're talking to investors and deciding who to invest with, it really comes down to how they determine what a success and a failure is. And I normally tell that story as a success and a failure because I think every investment, you have successes and you have failures. And it's not necessarily failures, it's learning opportunities because we took that situation and we converted it into a learned opportunity to implement on the next house. I think if you look at a lot of, it all comes down to really marketing. And I understand that. I understand that, certain people and shows and everything, they have to sell with headlines to grab people's attention. I understand all of that. But when you're making a choice on who to invest with and who to affiliate with and who to learn from, you really want to do so with honest people who are always looking to better the process, better themselves, better their team, and ultimately the process and the investment. So, I can tell you that every single project I have ever done, there are successes and there are learning opportunities. And most of the time, there are double the learning opportunities as there are successes. And why is that? Because I'm looking for those learning opportunities.
Right.
People who only look for the successes and don't look for the learning opportunities are destined to repeat the same mistakes over again. It's like people who can't remember the history, whatever that quote is, are destined to repeat it. It's the same kind of principle. So it's a matter of just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. How am I looking at each opportunity? Am I looking just to look for the successes I'm getting out of it? Or am I looking to always improve upon the process? And I think I'm the latter.
Absolutely. I love the idea that, you start out with that story, with the idea of it's all about perspective. And I think if there's any major takeaways that, newer investors and younger investors can look at is like, okay, well, how do I frame my perspective in a way that's going to present failure in a way that's not something I should be scared of. It's a learning opportunity, exactly like you say. And I think, I've tried to implement that in all facets of my life, but I think as an investor, it's so important. So thanks, Ashley, for sharing that and for being candid and open about the story. And I think a lot of people, myself included, can take a ton away from, just how much perspective plays into investments. So I'm curious about, what your company is, Bardown Investments and How's It Look, LLC, what each of those companies do exactly, and, who a typical client of them would be. What are some of the benefits from multifamily investing and house flipping that people can expect? And how are these things different in responsibilities for you? How are they similar? So you can break down, your current businesses, what they do, and how they're different, how they're the same, and who you typically work with these investments.
How's It Look, our flipping business, we flip houses primarily on the main line. Sometimes we do houses outside of the main line, but they're typically historic homes built anywhere from like the early 1900s to, I would say 1960 probably is our sweet spot. But we've done other homes. For example, our recent project is in the 1980s. We've done houses in the early 2000s. But we really like to preserve the original character of a home and then put in modern conveniences. And we're typically doing higher end homes as well. My dad is extremely well versed on historic codes, so we found our niche there. When we originally got started, we realized we got that first house because it was a full gut rehab. And then after that house, we tried to pursue other houses and we realized we weren't getting them because we were competing in a red ocean. And we found our blue ocean by going to higher priced homes that needed full gut rehabs because less people were wanting to take on those projects. So that's what How's It Look does. Bardown Investments, we purchase large apartment buildings and we offer passive investment opportunities to investors looking to diversify their investment strategy or retirement strategy. So we're typically going after value add apartments. We're going after apartments that are in some form of distress, whether it's due to operations or it's physically in distress, and we are converting them. And we typically do that over a 3 to 5 year hold period. And we're looking to not only better the property, but it's really important to me that there's a social responsibility component as well. So we're bettering the community as well through partnerships with local businesses, small businesses, large businesses. It doesn't matter, just the entire community at large. So those are our two main focuses today. And then obviously, I know I recently became a partner of the real estate investor community. And that is a community that promotes financial freedom through the power of real estate for women, real estate investors. So we have been ramping the investor community up to provide all the resources that our community is asking for in terms of access to key opinion leaders in the industry, accountability, inspiration, knowledge. I mean, really anything that our community is asking for, we're trying to deliver. So that's a huge, I just love seeing women achieve financial freedom because women, unfortunately, are a minority in the real estate investing space, and that needs to change. And women outlive men anywhere from 6 to 8 years. And over that span of time, they end up, their cost of living is anywhere from $280,000 to $320,000, I believe. So it's a significant amount of money that needs to be accounted for. So women having financial freedom is really important for everyone. It's not even just a women's issue because that financial burden falls on the shoulders of family members, and it doesn't discriminate by gender. So it could be towards a son, it could be a brother that takes on that responsibility. I mean, really, the financial component of it is pretty heavy. So to have women have more knowledge about financing and investing is really important. I'm still shocked at how many meetups I go to, and being the only woman in attendance in 2020, it's very surprising to me. And I know that all of the people in attendance have a sister, a cousin, a wife, a mother, an aunt, a friend that's a woman. So invite them. That it's a great opportunity to bring women to the table, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I personally love that too, as a young woman who is trying to learn a little bit more about what my options are. So I think that that's really interesting that you bring that up. And I love the involvement in the investor community. I see so much of it from just being involved on Facebook and seeing all the little things and all the resources that everyone across the country is able to provide to women all over. So I think it's so cool how far reaching it's gone, and how special it is to be able to get more women in the room in those meetups. So I think that that's really awesome, Ashley.
Thank you.
So I'm curious also about the idea that you have experience with self-directed investing, and you bring up retirement, those sorts of things. We work with a lot of self-directed investors. That's our client base. So how has self-directed investing differed from other forms of investing in your experience?
Self-directed investing is an opportunity that I think most people are not very cognizant about. I know for me personally, I don't think I was aware of self-directed investing until at least my late 20s, if not my early 30s. And that's a shame. I mean, that's crazy. It's the number one strategy that wealthy people deploy. It literally is the number one. If you want to look across all wealthy individuals, that is one thing they all have in common, is they all are self-directing. And to me, the fact that it's not really taught, that, I worked in pharma, as we all know now, and we had a 401k program, and I invested in that from the very start. And I thought I only had one option. I literally thought that I wasn't given an alternative option. And when I went to another company, they basically told me, you need to roll it over into this company. So I was never taught that you could take that money and to roll it into a self-directed IRA account. I didn't know that I can invest in other asset classes. I didn't know that for years. And that was a detriment to my retirement savings, because that's basically almost a decade worth of lost, that opportunity cost was lost for me. I know people have found out later than me, so I don't want to be the person, oh, poor me, because I know other people have found out about this strategy much later in life. But it is definitely something that people just need access to information. I mean, it's the same reason why I am a huge proponent in the Invest Her community is women need to have access to this knowledge. And for self-directed, people need to have access. I still can't get over today when I meet with different investors to invest in our apartment opportunities. I propose to them these different options on ways in which you can invest. And even today, and there are people all different ages, say to me, what do you mean? What is this self-directed you're talking? I don't understand what you're talking about. So I just kind of blown away still to this day that people don't know about this strategy, and it is a huge game changer. So, I wish personally I had known about it earlier, but I'm glad, just having access to people who found out about it later in life. I'm glad at least I found out about it when I did. But it is a huge benefit to your ability to diversify. You don't have to use your 401k to solely invest in the stock market.
Absolutely. I think that that's It's so interesting, especially because you bring up such a great point, the idea of having the access to information and knowing where to go to find it, or having this network. So such like real estate investor, especially for anybody of any age, women especially, to be able to meet with folks and learn that this is an opportunity for themselves. I know one thing that I was able to get to do before the pandemic happened was go to my old high school and talk to the investment club about the self-directed IRA option, which was really cool, especially because I got to meet with a lot of younger kids. But the one thing that really bummed me out, so to speak, was that there was probably like 2 girls in each class. And I wish I could have, as not to, it was important to get any young person understanding that this was an option for them, and especially to start early. But I just wish, I wish there was another girl that I was able to connect with and be able to spread that message to. So I think it's really awesome that you do that. And it makes me very happy to hear that, there are so many great ways that women especially can access this information.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time, I know, within the investor community educating on self-directed IRA. I think it's a topic that when people learn more about investing, it's the most requested topic after they have a baseline knowledge. Because once you have a baseline, it's almost overwhelming how much information there is when you first get into learning about investing in real estate. So it's a lot to digest. And once you have that baseline information, you really, from there, you start to get more creative and with your mind on, okay, how do I actually execute this? It's also, too, a way to tap into a resource that you otherwise didn't think you had access to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a game changer, because a lot of people want to invest, but they don't know how to invest with no money down kind of principle. Mm-hmm. And, there's always seller financing or hard money lending or private money lending. There's all these other different syndication. There's always different ways you can leverage capital, but you could also tap into your own capital through self-directed IRA, which a lot of people don't know about that strategy. So a lot of people, once they find out about self-directed IRAs, realize, oh my gosh, I have all this capital that I could use to deploy in an investment that interests me, that I believe in. So for that reason, obviously, then people take a huge liking to it and are more inclined to take action.
Gotcha. And I think you also brought up a really great point of diversity as well, and being able to diversify your investments, even within the niche of real estate. There's so many ways that you can diversify a portfolio. So I think that it's also very interesting that you bring that up. I'm also wondering, in terms of we brought up the woman investor community, could you talk some more on the process of writing The Only Woman in the Room, Knowledge and Inspiration from 20 Women Real Estate Investors? Because I think it's so interesting that this was a collaborative project. And, I'm wondering, what the process was like, if this was your first time writing for a publication like this, what was that like for you? What was, you talk about being able to take some new learning opportunities. And I think this year of any year in my lifetime, I know for me personally, has been a year of, okay, well, let's find some new learning opportunities. I've learned how to cook, those sorts of things, instead of being down on myself. I learned how to drive, like those sorts of things, and being able to take this year and learn some new things from it. I'm curious about, what this process was like for you, and, what you were able to get out of it and what you'll be able to take on afterward.
I'm honored to have been the facilitator, of this book, and to have come up with the idea. It literally came out of nowhere. It's nothing, brilliant about it. When you look at the fundamentals, I attended Dave Van Horn, who I know is a good friend of CamaPlan and Carl and Maggie's. But Dave Van Horn holds an event every year called the Mid-Atlantic Summit. It's in Philadelphia, and I attend it every year. I love this event. It's one of my favorites, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So Liz Faircloth and Andressa Godelli, they were in attendance, and they asked all the women in attendance to have lunch together during one of the days. And as everyone was getting to know each other, I looked around the room, and it baffled me that we were able to put together just 2 tables comprised of 16 women in a room full of 450 people. Wow. And at that moment, I just said to myself, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be titled The Only Woman in the Room. And I don't know how it's going to take shape. I don't know what it looks like now, but it just came over me like a wave on the drive home. I told my husband, this is what I'm going to do. And that was almost 3 years ago. So after that, I was intentional for the next year, listening to different women's stories and basically interviewing them without them knowing to know whether or not I wanted to ask them to be in the book. And from there, I asked all of these women, do you want to write a chapter in this book? And everyone was, absolutely. And they were just so excited to be part of this. And I was excited to have them be part of it as well. Right. So I gave them a lot of freedom in terms of I gave them a topic. Every woman has a chapter, and they each have a different topic, but they could do whatever they wanted with that topic. They could emphasize that topic with respect to being the only woman in the room. They didn't have to include woman in the room. But I really wanted it to be knowledge and inspiration in each chapter, components of tactical information that you could take and implement, along with inspiration to help women, actually anyone. That's one thing that I think people were surprised about is I wanted anyone who picked up the book to be able to relate to someone in the book, male or female. It doesn't matter to me. I think we can all be part of the solution in helping women achieve financial freedom. And absolutely. I know a lot of men have contacted me and just been so overwhelmingly complimentary about this book, and not only wanting it for themselves, but then later buying copies for their friends, their spouses, their daughters. I mean, I'm signing copies for some of these gentlemen's daughters because they're like, this book is so profound. Can you please I'm buying another copy. Can you please sign it for my daughters? And, it's just really cool. It's a lot. The reason why I wanted to do it is I have 2 daughters personally, and I wanted them to be able to look up to other women one day, because I know they're going to find their mom is not cool at some time, probably in their teenage years. And I figured, okay, well, here's 19 other women they can find really cool. And I also, too, wanted to provide an opportunity for these 19 women to use as part of their resume to be a keynote speaker, to be on the main stage, to stop being just on panels about what it's like to be a woman in real estate investing, for them to really highlight and showcase their career, for them to be role models in the industry, not just for women, but in general. So that was really a huge motivator for me too. And that's why I picked women in all different stages of their investing career. This isn't a book full of 27-figure earning women in real estate. This is a book on women on all different parts of their journey, all different parts of life, all different backgrounds. So that's why I wanted everyone to be able to relate to someone in the book. It was very intentional on who I picked. And I think the women in this book just, oh my gosh, they wrote such brilliant chapters, better than I could have ever imagined. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I love the idea that this book that starts as, the title so descriptive, The Only Woman in the Room, knowledge and inspiration from 20 women in real estate, has been able to create so much opportunity for so many people. I think that that's amazing. So, congratulations to you and to all the women involved in it. I think that that's incredible.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the support.
Oh, absolutely. I want to pick that up for myself now at this point. So for you personally, Ashley, what's whether it's been, this year or just in general, what is a tool or a resource that you use to keep up with your own personal knowledge of investing? Whether it's, you get stuff out of the real estate investor community, new information from women there, or if it's, if there's a specific website or publication that you go back to often, or is there anything new or interesting that you've read recently or watched lately that you found interesting? And is there any new tool or lesson you've picked up from anything recently?
I have this rotating process that I use. So it's a 3-prong rotating process. So the first book or source of knowledge or whatever, whether it's a podcast, a book, a video, has to be on a specific topic related to what I'm doing. So it could be on construction management, it could be on asset management, it could be on accounting. It's very specific. And it's very tailored to what I'm doing. It's typically written by someone extremely experienced and knowledgeable. Then I go to a resource that is from a newbie in the industry. That's my second look. So I'm listening to a podcast that's from a new investor, someone very, very green. And then the third resource I use is something where it is completely unrelated to real estate. The reason I use this process is the first one obviously gives me high level information that is perfecting a process that I'm probably already deploying in the first place. The second is showing me something that I'm doing from a completely new, unbiased perspective, because they haven't been tainted in the way this is how it's done in the industry. So I like listening I find that I learn as much from someone new to the industry as I do from someone who's been in it for 20 years, because someone who's new to the industry isn't set on their ways. They're still trying to figure things out. So they're willing to try things that people who have been in the industry for a long period of time aren't willing to try. And sometimes it works 20 years later, what they're trying. And then the third thing is I find that so much of the things I learned in pharma were very transferable to real estate. So to me, that shows how, any outside industry, it's really just on how you conduct business. So anything that's related, that's unrelated outside of the industry can be seen as related. So that's why I try to gain knowledge from outside resources as well. Looking at articles of other businesses, listening to podcasts that are unrelated to real estate, just business podcasts, finance podcasts, because you can find a lot of things that are transferable. So I really try to diversify where I'm getting my knowledge from and where I'm getting, inspiration from as well, because it really can create, just something new, to revamp something that, we're always used to syndicating a certain way. And all of a sudden you look at how they syndicate art and you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Or for example, there's a woman named Cody Sanchez. She probably doesn't even know how much I look up to her, but I have like the biggest fan crush on this woman. She is just incredible, and she's brilliant, smart, and she has a very fresh, cool way of looking at things, and she buys businesses. So it's very similar to real estate, but it's different. And I have learned so much from her. And she doesn't even know it, but I've learned so much from her just because she is doing a similar process, but it's different. And it's very helpful for me to see what she's doing because I can use it alongside of our businesses. So that's really, I think, been very helpful for me in my process.
Wow, that's one of my favorite answers I think I've ever gotten to that question from any of our guests, because I think you have already touched on, you have such a strong and interesting take on perspective and how important it can be to investing. And you have just described, I think, analyzing 3 different perspectives on how your own perspective on a topic can be changed. So I think that it's very interesting and very layered and a really beneficial process, it sounds like, for you. So really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question that I have is, now you're established and your businesses are doing great and all of these things, and you've been able to accomplish the fact that, you have time to spend with your family. You also compete with your horse, wow, in your spare time, which I think is a really cool fun fact. How did you first come about this hobby, and what did it start as a hobby and now it's become is something that you should do regularly? I'm blanking on the word for some reason, but has there been any discoveries or anything that's come up about your own mindset or perspective as an investor that's maybe surprised you or come up out of nowhere from the discipline that's required of these competitions?
I've been riding since I was 4.
That's so cool.
My mom took me riding when I was 4 because she wanted to be able to do something together with me when I went through my teenage years, because she knew that there would, teenagers and their moms always have issues. So she always wanted something to bring us back together, which is really cool. So my mom and I started riding together, actually. My mom actually recently got back into riding, so that's really cool. She had a car accident, so she was out for decades and couldn't ride, but now she's back at it. But so riding, to me, when I first started, it was fun, but I'm a huge animal lover, so I have a huge addiction to animals and just trying to communicate with someone or something when you don't speak the same language is really cool to me. I get a lot of inner peace from doing that, whether it's with a dog, with a horse. The horse component, though, is really cool because you're competing together.
Right.
And that takes on a completely different dynamic. So, I started when I was 4, and I've ridden for over 30 years now. And it's something that I will forever do. It's crazy to me because it kind of does 2 things for me. Mm-hmm. The one thing it does for me is it's almost like my meditation. It provides so much peace for me. When I can't ride for a while, my husband's like, you need to get to the barn, because it kind of like, like I say to him, you need to go work out. Like, you need to just get distressed.
Like knowing and that thing that can center someone again. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think everyone needs to
be like, go.
Yeah. And I think everyone needs that. I think everyone needs an outlet. Even as, when you have a family, like my husband, he spends 2 hours a day working out still. I mean, he retired 3 years ago, but he still needs that time. It's good for him mentally. It's good for him physically. It's really good for our kids to see that we both take care of our health and our bodies and our minds. So I'm a huge believer in having an outlet like that, especially a physical activity outlet, whether you go for a walk, you go for a run, it doesn't matter, go for a bike ride, just meditate, yoga. It just needs some sort of activity to let your mind decompress. So that is really cool. But the crazy thing about it is that I'm super competitive about it. So you'd think it would provide, it does. I get anxiety about showing, and I get stressed, especially at the big competitions. But I think I'm just crazy because I kind of enjoy it. So I'm a person who believes that if you do something, it should be for the highest level you can do it at. And I know that's not everyone's philosophy. It's definitely, my husband's like, why can't you just ride just to ride to have fun? But I just can't. I'm just a very competitive minded person.
I don't think that makes you crazy either. I think that it kind of, I don't know, it keeps it, there's so much that goes into being healthily competitive, like focus and things like that. So I'm sorry to, cut in, but I think that it doesn't really make you crazy necessarily. I think it kind of keeps your mind sharp and smart, I think.
It's also too, just, I've always had self-discipline from a very young age. Quick little side story. All my friends in kindergarten were playing the piano, and I wanted to play the piano. My parents were like, no, you're riding, you're in ballet, you're in tap, you're in jazz. Like, we don't have time for piano. Like, this is it. And I was like, no, I really want to do it. So I finally convinced them, and they said, okay, you have lessons for a month. And if you don't practice, you can't continue it. So in kindergarten, well, I think I started in first grade. So in first grade, I was all of 6 years old, and I would set my alarm every morning. They got me an alarm clock, and I set it myself because they were like, they didn't want me to do it. Like, they didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to do it. My dad was self-taught at piano, and he can just hear a song and play. So they're like, why can't you just do that? Like, we don't need to pay a teacher, know? And, so I was determined. So every single day, like literally every single day, weekends included, I would get up at 6 a.m. and I would practice from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And then I would get ready for school and go to school. And my piano turned from me doing a trial period for a month to playing for 9 years. So with the same piano teacher. So I'm a super determined person. I've always just been that way.
That's really awesome. Yeah. Even at 6, that's really cool.
It's crazy. And I have other stories too. Like, I don't know if you want to hear this or not, but I kind of started a business in middle school because I kind of wanted to prove my teacher wrong about this whole concept of having a monopoly on. She was trying to teach us about checking books and accounting. And so she was charging us for our desks. And I was like, you're creating a monopoly because you're the only desk business in town. We have no other option. So I went to the janitor at recess, and I brokered a deal with him. Hey, do you have any spare desks? And the teacher found out I was doing it. So she evicted me from my desk. So I had to sit on the floor with all of my schoolwork and everything on the floor while I used recess to clean desks. No joke. I brought in Windex and paper towels. I cleaned these desks. And then I had this desk business, and I would rent desks to the other kids in my class. And I was getting the desks for free, not real money. It's all fake money. And I was getting these desks from the janitor. So at the end of this little period of, working with your checking books, we had an auction, and you could buy candy with however much money you had in your, fake checking book. And of course I had the most because I had figured out a way to create a business out of this whole thing. So I just, I don't know. Sometimes I think that some of the ideas I come up with are just a little crazy, but it's fun when you look back on them.
Oh, that's absolutely phenomenal. I would watch a Disney Plus series about a little girl who is trying to cheat the checkbook lesson system. But it's so smart. I think it's so interesting, and it obviously says so much about how incredible of a leader you are now, and how successful you can be when you really put your mind to something. So I think that that's incredible. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing these stories. The last question that we ask all of our guests, and I'm excited to hear your responses based on our conversation today, is what would you say your keys are to building wealth and unlocking financial freedom? I know we've touched on a lot of them, and this doesn't necessarily have to be financial, but what are the things, if you could boil it down to a couple of points, that have informed the way that you look at your quote unquote success?
Being ethical, being driven, and partnerships.
Awesome. That's such a perfect, concise answer that kind of like wraps everything up so well. So I think that is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those keys. Thank you for sharing this information with us today too. I feel like you have such an interesting background and stories, and even dating back to, your childhood, and how incredible those stories that seem crazy have turned into such a wonderful, successful woman who is giving back to her community today. So thank you so much, Ashley, for taking the time to share all this with us today. I'm excited to share this with our listeners.
Thank you again for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad. And one final question before we do go is just how can people reach you? Do you have any sites or social media that our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, can use to reach out?
You can find me online at badashinvestor.com. And from there, you can link off to the different company websites and also the book. So that's BADASH investor.com. And I'm on Instagram at badashinvestor.
I love that pun. I'm a big pun girl, but that's amazing. So everybody listening, be sure to check that out. Be sure to be on the lookout for more upcoming events featuring Ashley Wilson, Bardown Investments, and How's It Look. But until then, everyone, thank you so much for joining us again this week and this year on the road to financial freedom. Be sure to tune in next week to hear more from our experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom. Or you can call CamaPlan today to learn about how you can start to take control of your future wealth. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We truly hope that you're enjoying your ride along the road to financial freedom so far. If you like what you've heard and learned, or if you want to hear more about certain topics that we may have already covered or have yet to cover, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We would love to hear any feedback from you so that we may continue to make our podcast the best that it can be for you, our listeners. Thanks again, everyone, and remember, tune in next week to The Road to Financial Freedom.